The sun dipped low behind the horizon, casting a golden hue over the quiet convent. Inside the chapel, Saint Therese knelt at the altar, her heart heavy with a burden she could not name. "Lord, why do you remain silent?" she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. The stillness of the room pressed in around her, thick with an unseen weight. For years she had prayed with unwavering faith, but today something felt different, almost as if the air itself was holding its breath. Her hands trembled, gripping the rosary beads, seeking solace that did not come. In that moment, the silence stretched too long, and her faith began to waver. Saint Therese closed her eyes, trying to push away the creeping doubt. Was this a test of her devotion, or a sign of something far deeper? She wasn't sure, but the uncertainty gnawed at her spirit. The darkness outside seemed to mirror the turmoil within her, as though the heavens themselves were watching, waiting for her next move. As the days passed, the silence in the chapel seemed to grow louder. Saint Therese felt as if she were drowning in her own doubts, each unanswered prayer a weight upon her heart. "Why do you hide from me, Lord?" she murmured, her voice shaking with a mix of frustration and sorrow. The words echoed off the cold stone walls, but there was no response, no answer to her cries. Each morning, she rose with the same fervor, reciting the prayers with unwavering devotion. Yet, despite the repetition, the sense of divine presence that had once comforted her remained absent. It was as if God had retreated into the distance, leaving her adrift in an ocean of uncertainty. Her faith, once a firm foundation, now felt fragile, like the thin thread of a rope unraveling in the wind. Was she too weak, too imperfect for God's grace? The thought gnawed at her, but she pressed on, determined not to give in to the doubt that threatened to consume her. Yet deep within, the longing for a sign grew more desperate with each passing day. The days blended into one another, and Saint Therese's heart grew heavier with each passing prayer. The silence that once seemed holy now felt like a vast, unyielding void. "Is this the trial of faith?" she wondered, staring at the empty altar, her breath catching in her throat. Her hands, once steady and confident in their prayer, trembled as they held the rosary, each bead feeling like a stone pressing against her spirit. She had given so much to this path, devoted her heart and soul to the service of God, yet she felt as though her cries were swallowed by the abyss. The weight of her doubt was suffocating, but she refused to turn away. Saint Therese clenched her fists around the rosary, her knuckles white with resolve. "If this is my cross, then I will carry it," she whispered to herself, her voice breaking. It was not strength that sustained her now, but a flicker of hope that perhaps God would reveal himself in the quietest of moments. "I will not let go of my faith," she vowed. Even as the darkness seemed to press in around her, she held on to the thread of belief, not knowing if it was a lifeline or an illusion. One morning, as the sun's first rays touched the earth, something changed. Saint Therese woke with an unfamiliar sense of peace. The unease that had plagued her for so long felt distant, almost like a fading echo. For the first time in weeks, she felt something stir inside her, a presence she had been waiting for, though she couldn't quite name it. Could it be? She asked herself as she stood by the window, watching the sun rise over the quiet convent grounds. The light seemed different now, warmer, as though it carried a promise. With renewed strength, she walked to the chapel and knelt at the altar, the rosary again in her hands. But this time, something shifted. A stillness filled the space, not the silence of absence, but the silence of anticipation. She could feel it. God was listening. The weight of her doubts began to lift, replaced by a sense of calm certainty. Her prayer, once desperate, now felt like a conversation with a friend. The world outside seemed to slow, and in that sacred moment, she realized that she had not been abandoned. It was not God who had withdrawn. It was she who had not yet learned to listen. The realization settled over her like a gentle wave, and for the first time in weeks, Saint Therese knew she was not alone. Saint Therese's journey was no longer one of confusion and doubt, but of quiet determination. In the days that followed, she continued her prayers, now with a newfound sense of clarity. She had learned something in that moment of stillness. Faith was not about demanding answers or expecting divine revelations on her terms, but about waiting in trust and surrender. She began to pray with renewed fervor, not as one who was seeking, but as one who had already been found. The chapel, once a place of silence and isolation, now felt like a sacred refuge. Each prayer she uttered seemed to draw her closer to the divine, a divine that was always present, but only visible when she truly opened her heart. "I am here, Lord," she whispered, a soft smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Her faith, once fragile and uncertain, was now rooted deep in her soul, like an unshakable tree. She had found peace in the waiting, in the quiet moments where God's presence was not loud or dramatic, but quietly enveloping. The journey was far from over, but Saint Therese had crossed a threshold, and with it, a new chapter in her faith had begun. The days grew longer, and Saint Therese found herself sinking deeper into a spiritual struggle. Despite the clarity she had once felt, new doubts began to creep in, like shadows in the light. Each prayer she spoke seemed to fall into an abyss of silence, and the more she tried to reach out, the more distant the divine seemed. "Am I truly hearing you, Lord, or am I deceiving myself?" she questioned, her voice trembling. The chapel that had once been a sanctuary now felt like a battleground, her faith and doubt locked in an endless conflict. She knelt, her hands trembling around the rosary trying to focus, but her thoughts scattered in every direction. "Is this the path I must walk, or am I lost?" she whispered, her eyes staring into the darkened space before her. The silence answered her only with the echoes of her own voice. The weight of doubt pressed harder now, and Saint Therese realized that this was no longer a simple test of faith. It was a battle for her very belief. The war inside her heart raged, but she did not know if she could endure much longer. The quiet struggle continued for days, each prayer now a question, each moment of silence a trial. Saint Therese found herself questioning everything she once believed in. "Why must this path be so lonely, Lord?" she murmured in despair, her voice small in the vast empty chapel. The doubt in her heart grew, gnawing at her spirit. She could no longer tell if she was praying to a God who was truly present, or if she was simply talking to the silence that surrounded her. She had given so much, devoted so much of herself to this life of faith, yet now she was adrift in an ocean of unanswered prayers. "Is this what you wanted for me?" she whispered, her fingers gripping the rosary with desperate strength. The sense of abandonment was crushing. Had she misunderstood the calling, or was God punishing her for some unknown sin? Each night her prayers became more desperate, more frenzied, as if the act of praying was the only thing that kept her tethered to the life she had chosen. But deep within her, there was a growing fear that she was slipping further away from the divine, and she could not find her way back. One evening, as Saint Therese walked through the convent garden, her mind heavy with doubt, she stumbled upon a quiet moment of clarity. The night air was cool, and the garden was bathed in the soft glow of the moon. The flowers, though wilting with age, still released a faint fragrance, and the wind whispered through the trees. For the first time in what felt like forever, Saint Therese stopped and simply breathed in the stillness. In that quiet moment, a thought emerged, as fragile as a spark in the dark. What if God had never left her? What if it was she who had stopped listening, who had allowed her doubts to cloud her heart? "I have been so focused on the silence," she thought, "that I have missed the small whispers in the breeze, the light through the leaves." The realization was both humbling and freeing. She had spent so long searching for something grand, something obvious, that she had overlooked the subtle ways in which the divine was always present. This moment, however small, was enough to ignite a flicker of hope within her, a reminder that sometimes faith requires simply being still and open to the quiet presence of God. In the days that followed, Saint Therese's prayer life began to shift. She no longer approached her prayers as a means of seeking answers or solutions. Instead, she began to embrace the silence, letting it fill her rather than overwhelm her. "Lord, I do not need answers," she whispered in the chapel, her voice soft but steady. "I need your presence." The weight of her earlier doubts began to lift, replaced by a deeper sense of trust. She realized that faith was not always about certainty, but about surrendering to the unknown, accepting that God worked in ways that were not always visible. "I trust that you are here, even if I cannot feel you," she prayed, her hands open, palms up in a gesture of surrender. The chapel, which had once felt like a place of conflict, now seemed to embrace her, its silence no longer a void, but a sacred space where she could simply be. Saint Therese's heart, once burdened with doubt, now opened in quiet surrender, and she knew that her faith was not about understanding, but about trust in the presence of God, even when it was hidden. As Saint Therese continued to embrace the silence, she began to notice the small miracles around her. Conversation with a fellow sister would lift her spirit, a passing breeze would carry a scent that reminded her of God's love, and a quiet moment in the garden would fill her with peace. Perhaps the miracles are not grand, she thought, but hidden in the small, quiet moments. Her faith, once uncertain and fragile, had deepened into a steady trust, not based on dramatic revelations or obvious signs, but on the simple, quiet presence of God in every moment. "I see now, Lord," she whispered one evening, standing alone in the chapel, "that you are always here, always present, even in the silence." The doubt that had once consumed her heart had been replaced with a profound sense of peace. Saint Therese knew her journey was far from over, but she was no longer afraid of the silence. She had learned to listen to it, to find God even in the stillness. One afternoon, as Saint Therese walked through the convent grounds, a sudden wave of peace washed over her. It was as if the earth itself had been bathed in light. The once distant presence she had been seeking now felt incredibly close, almost within reach. "Could it be?" she whispered, a flicker of realization dawning upon her. For days she had been wrestling with her faith, unsure of whether God was present, but now something shifted within her. She felt a deep connection to the divine, not in the form of a dramatic sign or revelation, but in the quiet stillness that enveloped her. It was as if God had always been there, waiting for her to listen, waiting for her to truly open her heart. The realization was humbling and overwhelming. In that moment, Saint Therese understood. Faith was not about grand gestures or visible miracles, but about the subtle, often unnoticed presence of God in every moment. The journey she had been on, the doubts and struggles, were all part of this divine plan, leading her to this very moment of clarity. In the following days, Saint Therese felt an urge to pray like never before. Her prayers, once filled with questions and doubts, were now filled with gratitude and surrender. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered, her heart swelling with unspoken joy, "for revealing yourself to me in the quiet moments, in the gentle whisper of the wind, and the light that dances on the leaves." Her soul felt lighter, her spirit freer, as though a veil had been lifted. She understood now that the answer she had been seeking was never far away, but rather it was hidden in plain sight. The world around her, the beauty of nature, the kindness of the people she encountered, these were the small miracles, the divine signs she had been overlooking. Saint Therese now prayed with a renewed sense of purpose, not seeking to understand the mysteries of God, but simply to honor the sacred presence that was everywhere. In her heart, she knew the divine was no longer distant. It was close, dwelling within and around her. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the convent, Saint Therese had a moment of profound clarity. She sat in the chapel, eyes closed in prayer, when a feeling of warmth and love filled the room. She opened her eyes and looked around. The chapel, though humble, seemed to glow with a divine presence, as though the very walls were alive with the light of God. "I understand now," she thought. "Your presence is not confined to grand miracles. It is in the smallest moments, in the stillness, in the love we give to others." The realization hit her like a soft breeze, subtle but powerful. The hidden prayer she had been reciting for weeks now took on new meaning. It wasn't just words, it was a connection, a bridge between her soul and God. In that moment she felt as though she could almost touch the divine, not as a distant, unreachable force, but as something intimate and personal. Her faith, once clouded with doubt, now glowed with clarity, like the sunlight piercing through the stained glass windows. In the weeks that followed, Saint Therese's life began to transform. The sense of peace she had found in her prayers began to spill over into every aspect of her life. She began to see the divine in the smallest details, the kindness in a stranger's smile, the rustle of the leaves in the trees, the laughter of the children at the convent. God is in everything, she thought with awe. In every moment, in every person, in every breath I take. Her heart had been opened, and she now saw the world with new eyes. She no longer needed grand gestures or powerful signs to affirm her faith. The ordinary moments of life were filled with divine presence. Each day felt like a new opportunity to experience God's love in the most unexpected ways. Saint Therese was no longer searching for answers or understanding. She had found what she had been seeking all along. God was with her, in the quiet moments, in the stillness, and in the smallest acts of love. It was in the simplicity of life that the most profound miracles unfolded. As Saint Therese continued her journey, she began to understand that her faith was not about seeking a single dramatic revelation, but about recognizing the divine in every moment. I no longer need to search for signs, she thought. The signs are all around me, in every detail of life. Her prayers had become simpler, more focused on gratitude than supplication. Thank you, Lord, for being present in every moment, in every breath I take, she prayed quietly one evening. The weight of the earlier doubts had lifted, and in their place was a profound sense of peace. Saint Therese no longer questioned whether God was near. She knew with certainty that he was always in the everyday acts of life. She had found a deeper connection to the divine than she had ever imagined, one that did not rely on dramatic moments, but on a quiet, constant presence. Her heart swelled with gratitude as she realized that this was the true miracle, the ability to see God in everything. The moment Saint Therese revealed the hidden prayer to the other sisters, whispers filled the convent like a cold wind. Some looked at her with awe, others with skepticism. Are you certain this is from God? One sister asked, her tone edged with doubt. Therese's heart pounded, but she kept her gaze steady. It is what he placed upon my heart, she replied. That night, she felt the sting of isolation more sharply than ever. In the chapel, her prayers were interrupted by the echo of others' doubts ringing in her mind. Had she overstepped? Had she mistaken her own longing for divine inspiration? The quiet sanctuary seemed heavier now, not with the presence of God, but with the weight of judgment. Yet deep inside, a faint ember of conviction glowed. She knew what she had experienced was real, though proving it would be the hardest trial she had yet faced. The days that followed were filled with uneasy glances and hushed conversations. In the garden, two sisters turned away as she approached, their murmurs abruptly silenced. Doubt seeped into her soul, threatening to undo her peace. Lord, she prayed, why give me this gift if it will divide us? Her steps slowed, her once bright spirit clouded by loneliness. But when she reached the chapel, she felt a strange, comforting stillness settle around her. The flicker of candlelight seemed to dance in encouragement, as if whispering, "Do not abandon what I have given you." It was then she realized, faith tested in fire would only emerge pure. One evening, the Mother Superior called her into her study. The room smelled faintly of old parchment and candle wax. "Therese," she began, "your devotion is admirable, but extraordinary claims require discernment." Her words were calm but firm. Therese's hands tightened around her folded habit. "I only speak what I have lived, Reverend Mother," she said softly. The older woman studied her face for a long moment. "Then pray for patience. Truth is revealed in God's time, not ours." As she left the study, Therese felt both chastened and strangely reassured. The path ahead would be slow, but perhaps God was preparing her for something greater than she imagined. That night, alone in her cell, Therese wrestled with a storm of conflicting emotions. She paced the narrow space, the cold stone walls closing in. "Lord, if I am deceived, strip me of this burden. If I am true, strengthen my resolve." She sank to her knees, her hands pressed to her face, trembling. In the stillness a thought came, not in thunder but in a whisper. Stand firm. It was not the proof she longed for, but it was enough to still the raging in her heart. She lay down, clutching her rosary, her breathing slowly easing into the peace of surrender. The following week, during evening prayers, a moment came that stilled every heart. As the sisters chanted, a soft breeze moved through the closed chapel, and the candles swayed without extinguishing. Therese's eyes filled with tears, not because she saw a miracle, but because she felt an overwhelming sense of God's nearness. The others noticed too, their chanting faltering as they glanced toward her. For the first time in many days, the doubt in their faces softened. Therese bowed her head, her heart whispering, "Your will, not mine." She knew the trial was not over, but she no longer feared the weight of it. She had been strengthened. The night was silent, except for the faint rustle of leaves outside the chapel window. Saint Therese knelt before the altar, her eyes closed, when a warmth unlike any she had felt before wrapped around her. It was not from the flickering candles or the summer air. It was a presence, unmistakable and pure. A quiet voice stirred within her heart, not heard with the ears, but felt deep in her soul. "I am with you. Do not be afraid." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling freely down her cheeks. She had longed for clarity, for a sign that her path was not imagined, and now it had come, not with thunder, but with gentle certainty. Her heart beat with an almost painful joy, and her whispered response trembled in the stillness. "Your will, Lord, not mine." She knew then that her journey had entered a new chapter, one where she would carry not just faith, but a divine commission. The following morning, she awoke with a certainty that startled her. The message had been clear, but its weight pressed heavily on her shoulders. At breakfast, the convent chatter seemed distant, muffled by the echo of those divine words. She knew she could not keep this to herself, yet the thought of speaking it aloud made her pulse quicken. "This is not for me alone," she thought. "It is meant to be shared. But with whom? And how?" She carried the secret through the day, her every movement charged with quiet purpose. In the stillness of the afternoon, she returned to the garden, seeking the courage to take the next step. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, and the air felt alive, as if urging her onward. By evening, Therese found herself sitting across from Sister Claire in the small parlor. "I believe God has spoken to me," she began, her voice steady but soft. Sister Claire leaned in, her brows knitting with a mix of curiosity and concern. "And what did he say?" Therese took a deep breath. "That I must not be afraid. That he is with me. I think it is meant for more than just me." There was a pause, the air thick with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Sister Claire nodded slowly. "If it is truly from him, it will bear fruit. But prepare yourself, Therese. Truth is often met with resistance before it is embraced." The words struck her deeply, both a warning and a confirmation. That night, Therese prayed again, not for more signs but for courage. "Lord, if this is truly your will, let me walk it without fear," she whispered. The words felt heavier than any prayer she had spoken before. She knew that sharing the message could change the way others saw her, perhaps even bring mistrust, but she also knew that obedience was worth any cost. A calm settled over her, deep and unshakable. In her heart she could almost feel God's hand steadying her. This was not about recognition or vindication. It was about serving a purpose greater than herself. She rose from her knees with a quiet strength she had not felt in weeks. The next morning, she gathered a few sisters in the chapel. Her voice was steady, her gaze unwavering. "I have been given a message, not just for me, but for all of us," she began. The words came with a clarity and conviction that surprised even her. She spoke of God's nearness, of the call to live without fear, to trust even in silence. The sisters listened, their expressions ranging from wonder to skepticism, but none interrupted. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then Sister Agnes whispered, "Perhaps this is what we have been needing to hear." Therese felt the truth of it settle in the room like a soft light. The message had been delivered. What came next was in God's hands. The calm that had carried Saint Therese through her revelation shattered abruptly when news came of Sister Claire's sudden illness. The convent was thrown into quiet distress, and Therese felt a deep ache as she watched her friend weaken. "Lord, why her?" she whispered at the bedside. The one who had encouraged her now lay pale and trembling, her breathing shallow. Therese gripped her hand, praying with urgency she had not felt in weeks. But the heavens were silent, and doubt crept in like a cold wind. She had spoken of God's nearness with such conviction, but now she felt abandoned, powerless to help the one she loved most in the convent. Her heart pounded with the question she feared to voice. Had she been wrong all along? The quiet of the infirmary felt heavier than any silence she had ever known. The days passed, and Sister Claire's condition worsened. Therese prayed without ceasing, fasting, offering every small act as an intercession. Yet each morning, the signs were grimmer. One night, after hours of restless prayer, she left the infirmary and wandered into the chapel. Dropping to her knees, she whispered, "Have I mistaken your voice for my own hope?" The candles wavered in the draught, but no warmth came to her heart. The emptiness was unbearable. She longed for the presence she had once felt so vividly, but now it seemed impossibly far away. Alone in the vast space, her whispered prayers felt like they dissolved into the dark before reaching the heavens. One evening, as she sat in the cloister, the sound of quiet conversation drifted toward her. Two sisters spoke in hushed tones about her, about how her message now seemed hollow, how perhaps she had been misled. The words cut deeper than she expected. She did not confront them, she simply walked away, her stomach twisting. In her cell, she sank to the floor, clutching her rosary with white-knuckled desperation. "I cannot endure this without you," she whispered. The doubt, once a distant shadow, now loomed like a storm overhead. She wondered if her faith had been built on an illusion, and if she had led others astray by speaking too soon. Late one night, unable to sleep, Therese returned to the infirmary. Sister Claire's breaths were shallow, her skin cool to the touch. Therese sat silently, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest. She no longer had words to pray, only a deep groaning of the heart. And yet, in that fragile moment, she felt an almost imperceptible peace, like the quiet after a storm, when the air is still heavy, but the rain has ceased. It was not the surge of divine presence she had known before, but a faint reminder that God might still be near, even in the absence of answers. The next morning, Sister Claire briefly opened her eyes and squeezed Therese's hand. "Do not let go of what he told you," she whispered, her voice faint but firm. The words pierced Therese's heart, scattering the clouds of despair just enough for light to break through. She realized that even in the face of loss, the message she had been given was not invalidated, it was being tested. As the day went on, the doubt still lingered, but it no longer ruled her. She resolved to hold fast, not because she felt strong, but because she chose to believe that God was still present, even in the silence. The days of uncertainty had given way to a still, unwavering faith. Saint Therese rose early before dawn, the sky still deep blue with the first hints of light on the horizon. The silence of the convent no longer felt oppressive. It was a holy calm. She walked to the chapel alone, her heart steady, her purpose clear. Kneeling at the altar, she no longer asked for signs or proof. "I am yours, Lord, completely," she whispered. The words were not born of desperation, but of surrender. She understood now that the journey had never been about her strength, but about allowing His strength to work through her. The trials had shaped her into something unshakable, and she felt a quiet joy blooming within. It was the peace that comes from knowing one's place in God's plan, even without knowing every detail. That morning, she felt prompted to visit Sister Claire, who lay resting peacefully. "You are radiant today," Claire whispered, her voice frail but warm. Therese smiled, brushing a hand over hers. "It is not I, it is Him," she replied softly. Claire's eyes glistened with tears, and for a moment, the room seemed filled with something unseen but tangible. It was as though the divine presence surrounded them both, knitting their hearts together in a shared faith that needed no words. This was not a victory of circumstance, but a triumph of spirit. Even in weakness, the presence of God was strong, and Therese knew this was the truth she had been sent to live. Later that day the sisters gathered for evening prayers. As the chants filled the chapel, Therese felt every word resonate deep within her. She looked around and saw faces softened, hearts opened. Even those who had doubted her now seemed touched by a shared unity. It was not about her message anymore. It was about the one who had given it. She realized that God had used her brokenness and her perseverance to kindle a light among them all. For the first time, she felt no need to defend, persuade, or prove, only to love and serve. And that, she knew, was enough. A week later, as she walked through the garden at sunset, the sky ablaze with streaks of orange and rose, Therese reflected on the long road she had traveled. She thought of her first doubts, the silence, the trials, and the gentle whispers of grace along the way. She realized the miracle was not in a single moment, but in the transformation of her heart. Faith, she thought, is not holding on to what we see, but to what we cannot see. She felt no fear of the unknown, only trust. The wind stirred the leaves, and she smiled, sensing again that subtle nearness she now recognized instantly. On her final evening of reflection, Saint Therese returned to the chapel one last time before Compline. The candles flickered, and the air felt alive with quiet reverence. She knelt, resting her forehead on clasped hands. "Thank you, Lord, for the silence, the trials, the peace," she prayed. She did not ask for more. She simply gave thanks. Rising slowly, she turned toward the door, glancing back once, not with longing, but with fulfillment. The journey had not ended, but it had reached its first great summit. She stepped out into the night, carrying the unshakable truth in her heart. God was always near.